Welcome back, traders, to my market preview for the week of July 21st, 2024. Now, before we get into it, I would just like to ask you to like this video, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. Starting off with the dollar index on the weekly chart, just to give you a frame of reference, I am looking for price to come up to this draw on liquidity up here. I do have relative highs as well that I think we could hit, but I really want to focus in on this area of the chart. Zooming in still on the weekly, last week I talked about how I think price could come down to take the sell side below these lows and come back into this inefficiency, but I do not want to see price close below this mean threshold on this weekly order block. And that's pretty much exactly what price did. We see this long wick on the weekly candle, price went down to take out the sell side liquidity, but now we are above this fair value gap once again. I also mentioned last week that there is a fair value gap right here. So if we do come up, I think we can at least reach up to this fair value gap. Last week, we did create another fair value gap, and I want to really keep my eye close to the price action when the price gets up here. I don't want to see much resistance. I really want to see price shoot through it and trade above this fair value gap, and then I'll be looking for price to come back into this higher fair value gap. And of course, if we can get through this fair value gap as well, then the next swing high and the relative highs are in sight. Going down to the daily chart for a little bit more detail, we see that we have a daily fair value gap here along with a propulsion block. I really want to see price trade up and close above the mean threshold of this propulsion block, so above this line right here at 104.999. Now, if we can see closure above this mean threshold, that will give me confidence that the dollar index will go up for this weekly fair value gap and perhaps into this daily fair value gap as well. Also, I do want to see this fair value gap used as an inversion fair value gap. So something like coming back up to this mean threshold, for example. It's okay if we don't pass it the first time around, but then come back, use this as an inverted fair value gap. And then I want to see it come up into the second fair value gap and perhaps up a little bit more into the daily fair value gap. And of course, we could be looking for a run above these highs and looking for the relative highs as well. Moving on to S&P on the weekly chart, you can see that last week we did close below this fair value gap. It was a pretty nice drop, so I think we could be coming for this weekly busy and sweeping the sell side liquidity below the swing low. If we go ahead and take a look from this swing low to the most recent swing high, we see that equilibrium is right here, and this weekly busy is laying right below that equilibrium. So I think this is a reasonable target for price to reach for, but I do want to get a little bit more detail in the daily chart. The daily chart for S&P, we have a lot going on, so let me go ahead and run through it one by one. But first, remember that this weekly busy right here is where I'm looking for price to draw to, although we may not draw to it immediately. So last week, you can see that we took out the buy side liquidity early on in the week, and then we had massive drop on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, going through multiple fair value gaps. And currently we are in this fair value gap right here that I'll draw out for you guys. So there is a possibility that we could have a bounce back up to this SIBI because it did line up with a relative low right here. There's also another fair value gap up here, but I do not want to see this fair value gap get filled in, although it could come back up just to tap it. Ideally, I want to see this fair value gap with the old low push price down into our drawdown liquidity on that weekly busy. Now, one last indication why I think we could have some retracement is currently we do have a SMT divergence on the low, as you will see with Nasdaq, but right now S&P has not made a lower low compared to the low back on July 2nd. So just to draw it out for you guys, I'm expecting price to come up to this fair value gap and then start to have a nice drop into our sell side liquidity and our weekly fair value gap. Moving on to the Nasdaq, on the weekly chart, you can see last week we had a massive drop of close to about 1,000 points from the high to the low back into this daily busy. And as you can tell, we did take out this low, so we did create a lower low compared to S&P. Now, if price is going to go lower, the next target I will look for is this order block on the weekly chart, and I'll draw it out right here. We could be coming back into this order block. But again, I want to go down to the daily chart to get a little bit more detail. Going down to the daily chart, you can see that Nasdaq create a lower low. There is that SMT I was talking about. And you can also see my drawing from last week. I was anticipating price coming back into this daily fair value gap and then bouncing up to take out the high once again. Now, last week was a pretty big drop. I don't want to be overzealous and say that it's going to come and take out the high, although I think it is a good chance that we could be coming back into this fair value gap right here and perhaps maybe using this fair value gap to drive prices even lower down into that order block. So this week, I'm anticipating price coming back up to this fair value gap. It does line well with a weekly BISI, and we could be using that as an inversion fair value gap. And then when price is right here, I want to keep my eye close to see if it is going to go higher. If it is going to go higher, then I will be looking for the all-time high. But I do anticipate that we could be headed for a reversal and that we do have the potential for price to use this fair value gap to drive prices lower into this order block. So that's pretty much it for me this time. Thank you all for dropping in to hear my thoughts on the market for this week. I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments section, and if you've gotten something out of this, you can help me out by giving this video a like and subscribing to help this channel grow. But until next time, safe trading.